Hello, my name is Andy Dixon. I work for Desert Mountain. We are the manufacturer's representative for a new line of soil therapy products, one of which is Better Green, and we have some other affiliated products we're going to tell you about today. We have the creator of these products with us today, Mr. Micheal Melendrez, who owns his own arboretum and nursery in south of Albuquerque, New Mexico. And he's here to tell you a little bit about how the products are made, how they work, how soils work. And I can just tell you from personal experience that I've been using these products on and off now for the last 3 years. And I've done things with these products that I didn't think were possible. And it's all due to restoring the natural process of the soil food web. So without much further ado, I'd like to introduce Micheal and have him take over. And I hope you enjoy the talk. Thanks.
Thank you, Andy. What I'm going to do to begin with is kind of get you all up to speed as to what do we mean when we talk about a healthy soil. It's very important that you understand the concept of a healthy soil so that you can fully appreciate how to restore your soils. So we'll begin with some very basic information here. Let's first define what a soil or a healthy soil is. You have to have 4 major components in place, otherwise you do not have soil. You have to have the mineral component. The mineral component is going to be, is it clay, is it gravel, sand? What exactly is the material? You have to have water. Water has to be in the pore space of the soil in order for, obviously, plants and life to be able to have something to drink. You have to have air. Without air, then we would have a very unhealthy environment in the soil. Roots and earthworms and other little microbes would not be able to exist in that environment. And then we have to have humus. Humus is that rich, black, spongy material that when the pioneers first came across the Midwestern states and put a plow to the tall grass prairie, they described it as being an extremely rich and black soil. Well, what made it black and nice and soft was the humus component. So I'm going to explain to you what humus is and the difference between humus and organic matter, because that really is the single most often seen variable in a soil throughout the western half of the United States that will limit our success or create our failures in trying to grow a garden, a lawn, a football field, an orchard, or whatever it is you're involved with. And that is humus. So let's first ask the question, what is humus? Humus is simply a molecular material. By that we mean it is a conglomeration of various molecular compounds, what we call organic acids, that were made in nature by the microbial and chemical breakdown of organic matter. So, to put it simply, compost is not humus. Compost will turn into humus eventually if you give it enough time and enough water and enough air. Compost is going to turn into humus. But it in itself is not humus yet. And that's an important point to remember. If you take a pile of leaves and pine needles and grass clippings and whatever other coarse organic matter components you can come up with to make a compost, then obviously you've seen that happen where the bulk pile of organic matter is going to shrink in size and eventually turn into compost. Depending on what the organic matter material was you're working with, you could see a pile that's, oh gosh, let's just make a great big number up, 100,000 pounds of coarse organic matter would break down to and eventually turn into about 10,000 pounds of compost. If you allow that 10,000 pounds of compost to continue to break down and eventually turn into humus, it would eventually make about 40 pounds of humus. So that's your transition. To make 40 pounds of humus, we need about 100,000 pounds of organic matter. It's dramatic. So let me just illustrate this in a different way. Let's say that we go back to Vermont or one of the New England states and we find a really pristine, beautiful sugar maple forest. Big, giant sugar maples. They haven't been touched in 100 years, if not more. And every year, these trees drop their leaves. Every year, there's a layer of leaves on the ground this deep. Every year, the worms and the centipedes and the millipedes and the bacteria and the fungi in those soils will compost it and turn it down smaller and smaller and smaller until eventually it is humus. This has been going on for thousands of years in some cases. Well, let's get down on our hands and knees and let's scrape away any of the duff, the needles and leaves that are on the surface, and get down to the actual mineral soil. It's going to have a nice, rich black color to it because it's charged full of humus and life. So let's get down there and we're going to dig down into the soil and we're going to see how deep it is. Now keep in mind that hundreds, if not thousands of years, leaves have been piling up on this site and composting. Pretty undisturbed environment. When we start digging into the soil, we discover that the actual horizon, or black topsoil we call it, is going to be about 4 to 5 inches deep only. And then beneath that, the soil is going to have a lighter color. The B horizon is going to be a lighter color. It's going to have less humus, and that's going to be 4 or 5 inches deep. And below that, we're down to what we call the subsoils. The subsoils will have very little organic matter or humus to it. So thousands of years have been going on, and yet we only have a few inches of soil to work with. That's pretty amazing. Now, the problem that we run into with constructed landscapes, any landscape that was built with machinery, you built a subdivision, or you're trying to build a football field, or even a golf course, a farm, is how do you get from here to there? How do you get from no humus, no topsoil, to a condition of healthy soil when it's that dramatic? When it took thousands of years of immense biomass accumulation, immense composting, piling up of leaves to make just a few inches of topsoil. That's a big leap to get from here to there. So that's what soil restoration is all about. The other problem that we run into, of course, is that with constructed landscapes, with cultivated landscapes, we don't have topsoil. Just the actual physical manipulation of the ground destroys topsoil. The biggest enemy of this stuff right here, this humus, is that it's fragile. It breaks down real easy. Whenever you plow the land and leave your soil exposed to the sunlight, humus breaks down. Sunlight alone will break it down. Fertilizers break it down. Nitrogen, when it's put into the soil in a chemical form and put in too great a volume, causes a chemical reaction that oxidizes or destroys humus. It goes away. So when you go back to those prairie soils in Illinois or any of the Midwestern states that when they first plowed it, that soil was extremely deep and rich. Today, it doesn't exist. There is no topsoil. They're working now with just the mineral soil. So it's a big problem. We have desertification as a big problem worldwide. Our deserts are growing, and they're growing because of simply what's happening. Humus is disappearing faster than it can accumulate. That's our other situation, how to accumulate humus. If it took thousands of years in that sugar maple forest to grow just a few inches, then how are you going to do it in your own yard in a short period of time? Well, I'm here to tell you that it can be done. I have evidence I've brought from Los Lunas, New Mexico, where I'm out of, samples of soil that I have grown. Now, our property was purchased in 1985, and it essentially was a sterile clay soil with no organic matter and no humus in the soil to be found, and also extremely rich in salt. In the wintertime, the soil would turn white. There was so much salt. So I brought a sample of the soil as it was when we first started, and I'll pass this around. And you can actually look at this chunk of clay and see the white salt crystals in it. This is what we started with in 1985. This is what our soil is today. It's this rich black soil. And in some parts of the yard, it's about 10 to 12 inches deep. Now, how did we develop that? Well, we developed it by, first of all, inoculating the soil with the living component of the soil. Soil has to have life. It has to have this right here. And again, if you're lacking any one of these four items, then your wheel, think of this as the spokes of a wheel. Your wheel is not round, and you're going to have a bumpy ride. The life of the soil is not going to be able to thrive in that environment. So we have to be able to make the wheel round. We have to balance the mineral, the air, the water, and the humus in order to make the soil work. So what we do is we put into the soil a living humus, a humus that has been intentionally cultured and charged full of living microorganisms so that we can spread it like you would fertilizer. And this will inoculate the site, essentially. What we don't understand is why, when we do this, these microbes actually contribute to the ongoing growth of humus. It's called the terra preta phenomenon. About 2 years ago in the Atlantic Monthly Journal, there was an article about the terra preta phenomenon where essentially they find places in the world where humus is growing faster than what the organic matter pipeline can account for. And so in other words, these microbes are making humus faster than the energy that's flowing into the system can be responsible for. We don't know why, but it does work. And that's exactly the same thing that is happening on my site in Los Lunas, New Mexico, where we are growing humus faster than what we would normally see. In our school days, when we were growing up, they would teach us that in order to grow 1 inch of topsoil, it would take nature 100 years or 1,000 years or something like that. Yet, on our arboretum grounds in Los Lunas, we have 10 to 12 inches of that black topsoil, and we've done that in roughly 17 years. So it's pretty dramatic. Now, let's look at something else here. You have to understand what this microbial community, this balance is all about. When we talk about the life in the soil, why is that important? 30 years ago, when I was an undergraduate student at New Mexico State University, they taught us that the living component of the soil, the bacteria and the protozoas and the nematodes and the fungi, the molds, all these things were bad. They were treated as the enemy. And so we basically created chemicals to intentionally destroy them. Well, now we know that isn't true. Now we know that they are actually part of what we call a soil food web, and that they are actually very important. And if you don't have them, you can't possibly have healthy plants. In fact, I can make this statement, and I call this my statements of simple truths. And nobody in the world is going to dare challenge me on this. You cannot grow a healthy landscape, a healthy crop, a healthy plant of any kind without having a healthy soil. Okay? That's the first simple statement or simple truth. Second, no fertilizer has ever made a soil healthier. Okay? Therefore, if those two statements are true, and they are true, if a fertilizer cannot make a soil healthier, then it cannot make a plant healthier. Because you have to go back to the first simple truth. You can't have a healthy plant without having a healthy soil. We've proven this in the hydroponic business. Hydroponic growers have been trying to make plants healthy since the beginning of hydroponic growing. They've never succeeded. They have chronic disease problems. They have chronic nutritional deficiency problems. They've never been able to solve it with chemistry. So, in the soil environment, or even in a hydroponic environment, when you look at the root system of a plant, you have the new growth of the root system, that what we call the hair roots, that are part of the nutrient and water uptake part of the plant. If you look at it under a microscope, because these hair roots are really small, and it takes a microscope to really see this on a clear level, you will see that around the perimeter of the hair root, there's going to be a slimy zone. We call this the rhizosphere zone. I have trouble with that word. This zone basically is composed of a sugary slime. This slime we call mucus. The technical word is mucopolysaccharides. Now, what's happening is the plant is actually exuding this sugary slime to coat the hair root, and the reason why it is doing that is that that sugary slime is acting as a shield to protect the hair root from the environment. It is also serving as a food source for the bacteria and other trophic levels of life that are living really close to the hair root. So if you were to, again, look at it on a microscopic level, you would see a really dense population of microbes real close to that slime. And the further out you go away from the slime, the fewer number of microbes you'll see. And so they're busy eating the slime, and then the microbes that ate the slime, they only live an hour and a half. After an hour and a half, they die of old age. And their own body parts will then go into the food cycle of that environment, and they'll get eaten by somebody bigger than they were. So we call those trophic levels. Every time you go up a trophic level, like if you have a little tiny microbe that's that size, and it could be either dead or alive, along comes another microbe that's a little bit bigger, and it will eat that one. Every time that happens, there's an excess amount of nutrients that were concentrated in the smaller microbe that the bigger microbe can't use, and that excess then goes into the environment and gets utilized by the plant community. So then we have an even bigger microbe, and it eats that one. Same thing happens. An excess amount of nutrients go into the environment available for plants to use, until eventually we get this great big old giant amoeba, and that amoeba comes along and eats that guy, and the same thing happens. The excess goes into the environment and becomes available for the plant community. So in a sense, what we're getting is a time release of nutrients, always happening for the plant community. All of these guys, when they die, they are organic matter. And when they die, they're going back into the food chain and the chemical chain and eventually make humus. They become humus. We're going to eventually become humus as well. We are going to return to the soil someday and become humus. Now, so here we have a bunch of microbes. In fact, I even brought a sample. Where is it? Ah, here it is. That is the microbe slime that lives along the hair roots. I'll pass this around. You're welcome to stick your fingers into it and smell it and taste it, whatever you want. If you dare taste it, I take no responsibility for that. But it is full of microbes. And this is how we, oh, lovely smell. Don't taste it. This is how we culture the microbes. We actually do it in the same slime environment. So that's what's happening. We've got this symbiosis happening here. When I say symbiosis, this is the key to the whole thing. These little microbes are what we call symbiotic microbes. That means that they are associating themselves with the plant. They are very specific to the kind of plant that is growing on that site. And so in other words, the kind of microbes that like to live next to the root of a ponderosa pine are different from those that like to live next to the root of a clover or a lawn, a grass type plant. So they're very, very specific. What they are doing is basically creating a force, a military force, if you will, around the root system, defending that root from invading pathogens, disease. So they are getting fed by the plant. When the plant exudes that slime and they have something to eat, they're being fed by that plant. And they, in turn, their purpose is to protect the plant from disease. So when you eliminate them, you open yourself wide open for disease. And this is why in the farming industry we have disease problems on our fields. Where chili is grown in southern New Mexico, that is rapidly being lost as a viable crop because there's a disease called Phytophthora, or chili wilt, that has invaded those fields and is making it next to impossible to grow chili on those fields. So the chili industry is moving to the Middle East now, Turkey primarily, because they don't have that disease there yet, but they eventually will. Phytophthora. So here we have a living shield of bacteria protecting the root, and so there's a symbiosis going on. But it gets even more involved than that. There's an even bigger organism that lives in the soil called a fungi. Fungi are like molds, but they're not exactly molds, that will infect the root system of a plant. And in the infection process, they will send out little tiny microscopic tubes throughout the soil matrix. They're called hyphae, and these hyphae will make an acid. At the very tip of the hyphae, they exude an acid, and that acid will erode the rock or the soil that that tip is in contact with and turns it into a liquid. And then they can transport that liquefied rock back to the plant. Phosphorus, iron, zinc, manganese, doesn't matter. They can transport all of those back to the plant and feed the plant those ions of nutrients that were sequestered or harvested by the fungi. The plant then, in exchange, will give to the fungi carbohydrates, sugars. Because the plant has chlorophyll and can conduct photosynthesis, fungi do not have chlorophyll and cannot conduct photosynthesis, and therefore have no way of making their own sugars. And so the only way they can get sugars is to buy it. So it's a bartering arrangement. They provide water and nutrients, the plant provides sugars. Symbiosis. Now, again, if you go back to the farm or a football field or a lawn, golf course where you have used chemical fertilizers, you have wiped that system out. It does not exist. And you can't possibly have a healthy plant. Because remember, going back to the simple truths, if you don't have a healthy soil, which involves this relationship, you can't possibly have a healthy plant. So our objective then is to restore all of that process. We're going to put all of those components back in the soil, and we're going to do it by putting this living community of microorganisms into exactly the same thing they would live in if you could find them in a pristine soil out in the wild, and that is humus. That's what our company has done. Our company has developed the only technology in the world that can do that. We are the only company in the world that employs microbiologists and soil scientists and people of knowledge that know how to make these things and keep them so that they remain stable. Once we put them into a package, they remain stable. They have shelf life so that they'll last long enough for you to be able to utilize them. If you went to a grocery store and bought yogurt that didn't have any shelf life in it, what's the primary reason why you buy yogurt? I'll tell you why. You may think you're buying it because you like the taste of yogurt. But the real reason why we eat yogurt is because yogurt is a natural source of microorganisms that are associated with our good health. And if you don't have those microorganisms in your gut, you can't possibly be healthy. There's a direct correlation between the lack of those organisms and colon cancer. So if you've been taking antibiotics, you better get those organisms back in your system because you must have them. They're part of your well-being. So, if you went and bought yogurt that didn't have any shelf life, or those microorganisms died immediately after you made the product, and they died, and you went and tried to eat it, I mean, it would taste awful. You wouldn't dare eat the stuff. So they have to create the yogurt to have shelf life and viability. Well, we have to do exactly the same thing. Now here's a product. I get into this argument a lot with different companies. This is a product that is not sold in Colorado, to the best of my knowledge. It's out of Texas. And I went to a conference about 1.5 years ago, and the makers of this product said, well, this has the same thing that you have, Michael. And I said, well, what do you mean? And they said, well, we've learned how to put the microbes asleep so that we have shelf life. Because that's really the key to these things, is we have to put them into dormancy, not asleep. Microbes don't sleep like we do, but they do go into a stasis or dormancy in order for us to buy that shelf life time. And so they said, well, we've learned how to do that so that we can have a good, viable product on the shelf for a long time. And I said, okay, does it stink? And they said, well, yeah, it does. And I said, well, if it stinks, then that's... I said, does it stink like rotten eggs? Anybody want to smell this? It stinks like rotten eggs. If it stinks like rotten eggs, that is because it's venting off an anaerobic gas called hydrogen sulfides. And if it's venting off hydrogen sulfides, that means that the very nasty, non-beneficial anaerobic bacteria that were in here killed the beneficial aerobic bacteria and ate them. And then in the decomposition process, they're venting out stinky gases like hydrogen sulfide and putrescine. The word putrid comes from the chemical term putrescine, which is a gas that stinks horrible. So anytime you have a rotting animal, a dead animal out in the desert that's rotting and it stinks, that's putrescine that's coming off it. And that's because there are anaerobic or facultative anaerobes, which are bacteria that can live either in an anaerobic environment or an aerobic environment, that are busy eating that dead animal. So if you smell this, it stinks, and that's proof that it is not viable, that it does not have the shelf life that we're talking about. Okay, now, there's different sources of this humus here. I encourage, when you're gardening, I encourage you to get into what I call the humus pipeline. Look for sources of organic matter that will eventually turn into humus. I want you to stockpile the leaves, the pine needles, the grass clippings. You must do that. That's very important because humus is going away faster than what we can accumulate it under most conditions. I also, of course, want you to use pure humus, this product, because this is the only real humus that you can buy on the market. And I want you to buy compost. You have to attack it from every angle. If you don't attack it from every angle, then you're losing ground. Remember, I talked about how a 40-pound bag of humus is 10,000 pounds of compost. So, yes, in other words, if I ask you to spread this 40-pound bag over 1,000 square feet of your garden, that would be the same as asking you to take a high-grade compost and putting it down 18 inches deep all over your garden. That would be hard, and that would be expensive. So that's why we say we want you attacking it from all angles. We do want you to use compost, and we do want you to use mulching, sheet mulching with wood chips and leaves and whatever you can get your hands on. But, of course, we also want you to use real humus. Now, there's different sources of real humus. Now, we manufacture humus. But in the industry, there is a geological humus that is mined from the ground. It is called humates. It's important for you to understand the distinction between humates and this. Humates, when they are mined out of the ground, basically what they are is geological deposits of organic matter that got squashed at one point in time, a long time ago. We don't have to debate how long ago it was, but it was a long time ago. And during this time of being squashed, it got compressed and humified. It went through the humification process and went from being trees and giant ferns and whatever, bamboos, to humus. But, of course, a long period of time goes by, and it's buried under hundreds of feet of overburden of rock and soil, and it dries out. Now, anybody who's ever had houseplants, if you let a houseplant get too dry, it's very difficult to get it wet again. It wants to repel the water. And we call that hydrophobicity. If you've ever worked with peat moss, and you let peat moss get too dry, then the water just rolls around on top of the peat moss. It doesn't want to get it wet again. Hydrophobicity. That is a chemical situation. Well, the same thing has happened to the humates. When they've been buried for a long period of time, and we could be talking millions and millions of years, they become so hydrophobic that they will not re-wet. They won't dissolve and work their way into the soil. Now, it's important that you know that because there are companies that sell these humates. And, in fact, this is the material safety data sheet. This is basically whenever you're making any kind of a fertilizer, chemical of any kind, you have to have on file an MSDS sheet so that you can basically demonstrate to your buyers that the product is safe, or if it does have hazards, how do you deal with it? If it's flammable or explosive or whatever, then you need to know how to deal with it. So if you're going to sell this product to the Durango School District to put on their football field, more than likely Durango schools are going to ask for the MSDS on this product, which we have. Now, this particular product is just simply a bagged, crushed up humate product that comes out of Texas. The humate itself is out of New Mexico, not far from here, but the company that bags it is out of Texas. And they admit by their own physical data portion on this MSDS that the solubility in water is less than 1%. And that means that it won't dissolve in water. So if it won't dissolve in water, how is it going to ever dissolve and go into your soil? Well, it doesn't. So what we do is we take, since that is a very affordable source of humus, though it is humates and geological in nature, what we do is we take the humate material and we tweak it. We do things to it. We basically give it an anti-aging formula, if you will. We give it biology, and we give it some nutritional components so that the biology will eat the wax or hydrocarbon off of the humate material so that it is no longer hydrophobic and it will dissolve and go into your soil. So we've reversed the chemical aging process of the material and made it humus again. And that's what Better Green is. So now we've done a lot of experimentation with this. In fact, we've taken just the biology component alone to prove our point. We've taken just that stuff. And we have saturated the soil with just biology. We took a lawn that was given fertilizer for many years, a lawn service company that came in every 45 days or so and sprayed it with a liquid fertilizer. And on October the 21st of 2001, we came in and drenched that soil with just biology. We didn't put the humus part in. We wanted to put just the bacteria and the fungi in and see would it make a difference. It did. In 19 days, and this is already November. And in November, things are trying to go dormant. We took that lawn and made it come out of dormancy and start growing using just biology. Now, of course, the problem if you do just biology without humus, again, you have a limiting factor there. And in order to make this system last and become as close to sustainable as possible, you have to have the humus part. And so that's why we actually, when we did that, we were actually playing around with the idea that we might be able to sell just the biology without anything else. But we've learned since then that to make this whole process really work, we have to work with a total picture. So, in fact, the biology will eventually conk out if you don't feed it. And we have found that the very best source of food for the biology is protein. And so we have played around with different mixtures of protein, and we've come up with a granular source. This is it. There's bags of it out there in the front also. And basically it's derived from beans and fish meal and shrimp, what they call chitin, which is the shells of shrimp from the shrimp industry in Mexico, and lots of other things, seaweed and so on and so forth are blended in here. So this is the perfect food for feeding these microbes. So 2 steps. We're going to put the microbes that are in the humus, we're going to put those on the soil. You don't have to rototill it in. Remember, they're water soluble, they'll dissolve, and they'll go right into the soil. And then we're going to put the food for the microbes so that they'll germinate and grow in numbers and be able to last a long time. This protein, once the microbes begin to eat it, they're going to slowly release the nutrient component of the protein. Just remember the tropic levels of organisms. When one eats another, there's a certain amount that leaks into the environment. The same is true here. Some of this protein in the form of nitrogen and other elements of nutrition will leak into the environment and become plant available. So that's the protein part. So we have the humus saturated with the living microorganisms, and then we have the protein. If we are in a really big hurry, or we just don't want to take any chances, and this is very often the case, particularly when you're dealing with more valuable real estate. If you're dealing with a farm that maybe the farmland is only worth $100 an acre, and that can be the case in some parts of the country, then certainly you do not want to be spending $200 an acre to improve the soils, because the value of the land simply won't justify it. But if you are on land that is like a golf course that is worth, I don't know what a golf course is worth, but let's just say it's worth $100,000 an acre, then that's pretty expensive real estate. And if you're dealing with that kind of real estate value, then you can afford and justify putting more effort into what you're trying to do. Your own home is the same situation. The value of your lawn, if you have a 1,000 square foot lawn, if you're living in a $150,000, $200,000, $250,000 home, then the value of the real estate can justify the amount of money that you're going to spend on enhancing the appearance and the function of that landscape to a point. You know, if you may not want to spend $10 a square foot fixing the land, but spending 10 cents a square foot is a reasonable idea. You can do that. So that's how you weigh these things. So in high value landscape, we hit it from a multi-directional approach because we don't want to take any chances. We want to make sure we succeed from the get-go. And that's why we offer many different components. These liquids here, the darker colored liquid called ambrosia, is simply liquid humus. Remember, I said I changed that humus so I can make it dissolve in water? That's proof. There it is, right there. So that is liquid humus. Why would we have liquid humus? Very simply, liquid humus moves through the soil faster than granular humus. So if time is of the essence, if you're fighting turf diseases, fairy ring, snow molds, pythium, all kinds of diseases that we find on irrigated lawns, and we always find it on irrigated lawns, then time is of the essence to get these materials into the soil. Liquid humus. Then, nectar is liquid microorganisms. That's what these guys claim to be. Difference is that if you open this up and smell it, you'll fall over backwards. You'll burn your sinuses out from the gases. If you open up the liquid nectar, it smells like nothing. Has virtually no aroma to it because they are definitely in dormancy and not consuming themselves. So again, liquid microbial inoculants go through the soil faster than non-liquid. Plus, you can also spray a liquid microbial inoculant as a foliar feed onto the leaves of a plant, and they can enter the plant that way as well. So foliar feeding of these liquids is a very common and practical way of doing it. There's many different applications to using the liquids above and beyond just putting it in the soil. Okay, then we have, of course, the protein, which the microbes must have in order to continue living on that site. And the other neat side benefit of the protein is, of course, you don't have to use any fertilizers again. The protein takes care of that, and it does it in a time-release fashion. It takes about 9 months in this kind of a climate for that protein to totally be consumed by the microbes. For 9 months, you're going to have a time release of nutrients, including the nitrogen, going into your soils, available to your plants. And then the dry humus or granular humus with the microbes charged into it. So I believe that what my company has done with the help of some very smart people have developed the only scientifically sound organic soil fertilizer, using that again loosely because I don't really call these fertilizers, but soil restoration, soil nutrient, plant nutrient program that exists right now, at least in the United States. And I believe it's worldwide, because if it wasn't worldwide, I wouldn't be getting the interest from international companies that I am getting. The world is changing, and we're growing less and less tolerant of polluting our rivers and polluting our oceans with chemicals. And EPA is getting more and more stringent on what chemicals can be used. Now, unfortunately, small farmers, they don't have the energy or the time to keep up with that. But big farmers, guys that are growing 100,000 acres or more, they stay on the cutting edge. And they know that if they don't change, if they don't work on enhancing their soils, eliminate disease problems, make the crop more fertile, the plant stronger so that it will resist disease, insects, and so on, they are going to have a hard time surviving as a business entity in the future. This works. We have proven it. We have done it on, for example, was it one of your employees that was asking about or I was telling him about the dying piñons on the hillside, because she was saying something about, well, do the native plants, do they need this, because they're tougher for this environment? And I said, well, if you look on that hillside, you see all those dead piñons. And why are they dead? And her answer was, well, bark beetle. Well, that's what killed them, but why did the bark beetle attack them in the first place? All the bark beetle are a symptom. They aren't the cause. There's another problem going on there. And we have done experimentation in this process where there are tracts of land in northern New Mexico, large tracts of land, 100 acres in size, where we have done this protocol over the past 2 or 3 years, and on those tracts of land there is not a single lost pinon. Yet if you go just a few hundred feet or even a dozen feet off of those tracts of land where we didn't treat, 100% loss of the pinons. So it's very definitive that if you can nutritionally support the plant by making the soil healthier, because remember, ultimately it's a soil that's making the plant healthier. So we can nutritionally support that plant, just like us. If you live on a Twinkie and hot dog diet, well, we might make it to adulthood, but eventually our teeth are going to start falling out of our head, and we're going to have health problems, aren't we? Versus if you live on a healthy diet. So it's the same thing. If you nutritionally support yourself, your body is better able to cope with the diseases, the pathogens that are constantly trying to take us out. And the plant world is exactly the same way. If you can nutritionally support them, and remember the simple truths, can't have a healthy plant if your soils aren't healthy, then that plant is better able to endure the pathogen insect world that is trying to take them out. And that is why we saw that example of these pinons surviving after they had gone through that restoration process. I'm a tree farmer as well. That's kind of how I got into this in the first place, is I grow trees for a living and have a retail nursery in New Mexico. And so my concern was that when I spend so many hundreds, if not thousands of hours every year collecting seed from the native trees of the Southwest, including Colorado, and some of the Midwest like Oklahoma and Kansas, I don't appreciate it when people kill my trees. I grow thousands and thousands of trees. And when I collect the seed and germinate and grow those seeds in my greenhouses, and then spend 3 years nurturing them and turning them into a beautiful specimen-sized plant, and let's say I send one plant out to a customer out of a block of 500, and that tree dies because they put something on it that I don't approve of, chemically that is. And they come back and they say, my tree died, I want another one. And I say, well, that's strange because the other 499 are still alive and very healthy in my, at my tree farm. What did you do wrong? So because of my stubbornness, if you will, I decided the only way I could solve this riddle is if I were to develop a nutritional program that I could offer my tree buyers so that they wouldn't kill my trees. I have visitation rights on my trees, folks. Don't hurt them. And so I had to offer them something that worked, and it worked every time.